For my Supreme Court case, I did Mcdonald versus Chicago. It happened in 2010. And to summarize, Otis McDonald felt unsafe in his home after having over 5 break-ins into his home. He claims his neighborhood had been overtaken by gangs. He was an avid hunter and owned many hunting weapons, but thought those were too extreme and big to use to protect his home. He wanted to buy a handgun, but could not because all handguns had to be registered. But the city of Chicago refused all handgun registrations after 1982 because of a citywide handgun ban that was issued. This led to McDonald and 3 others to file a lawsuit. They ended up ruling 5-4 in favor of Otis McDonald, and the opinion of the court was delivered by Justice Alito. He starts off by saying that Chicago had put in its handgun ban to protect its citizens from injury, loss of property, or even loss of their life from having a firearm. He then says that Otis McDonald said that he felt vulnerable in his home because he lives in a high-crime neighborhood, and with a handgun ban, he was not able to protect himself or his home. He adds that in the district court, the plaintiff's argument that the ban was unconstitutional was rejected in the district court. Alito also says the relationship between the Bill of Rights guarantees and the states must be governed by a single neutral principle. Then at the end, he says that they have never held the Bill of Rights to apply to the states, but with this case, there's an overwhelming consensus that it should. So they decided in this case that the Bill of Rights does apply to all the states. So the participants were Otis McDonald versus the city of Chicago. And for the concurring opinion, there were 2 concurring opinions told, one by Justice Scalia and the other by Justice Thomas. Justice Scalia joins the court's opinion, but says she only wrote a concurring opinion to respond to some parts of Justice Stevens' dissenting opinion. Justice Stevens condemned the theory of interpretation, which Scalia says underlies their whole court system, and she says that he wants to readopt the theory listed in the court case Palco versus Connecticut, but she claims that he does not favor the application of it. She also claims that Justice Stevens' response advocates to critics and proves to them that judges become overpowered to eliminate or exaggerate what people have said. Justice Thomas, in his concurring opinion, writes that the 14th Amendment extends to the Second Amendment right to keep firearms for lawful purposes like self-protection. For the dissenting opinion, one was written by Justice Breyer, the other by Justice Stevens. Justice Breyer writes that he agrees with Justice Stevens that the 14th Amendment's guarantees of due process does not include the right to have firearms. He goes on to say that the owning of firearms puts others' lives at risk way too often. Breyer writes that the court put all of its focus onto the Second Amendment, and if the ban was unconstitutional to that amendment, Breyer believes the 14th Amendment should have been focused on more. Breyer also argues that they based all of their conclusions on its reading of history and past court cases. Stevens' dissent was also based upon the 14th Amendment. And the impacts of this case, it was a landmark case. It struck down 2 gun laws in Chicago. It showed that the Bill of Rights does apply to the states, and all of the Bill of Rights apply to the states. And it incorporated the Second Amendment into the 14th and kind of showed how amendments are all connected.